And I think we're just going to do things a little backwards. As I gave you an agenda and I said, okay, well, we'll get to your article last, but I think we need to hit it first. 2014, big decisions. But you're seeing some positive trends, but you were measured in your optimism. Please explain.
Well, optimism is really difficult for me, so that was a huge effort.
Said the historian.
We have to always acknowledge that we don't know what's going to happen in the next 9 months, 11 months, and so we should be measured. I wanted to point out some of the signs. I think the obvious one, and I'm sure all your listeners are aware of this, is the unrolling disaster of Obamacare, which from everything we can see is not going to suddenly be fixed in March or any time. It is it's a tsunami, and the waves aren't really, they're big, but they're going to get bigger. And so I think that's going to weigh on everybody's minds. That's going to hit people in their pocketbooks. And I think that's going to be good for the Republicans. Also, I also think, and this I'm sort of ambivalent and not as optimistic as maybe I let on in the piece, but this whole Duck Dynasty thing, which was, at one level pretty insignificant, but on another level highly significant, because it went at a very popular show with millions of viewers, and you had the stars of the show who, said, we'll walk away from the money rather than give up our principles. It was so egregious the way that the network caved into a very, very tiny, special interest group, GLAAD, right, gay and lesbian, whatever else, special interest group, which, best estimates of homosexuality in America never get past 4% at most. And so they represent a very tiny subset of a tiny subset, and yet they were able to bring just outsized influence on a private enterprise. And so what I found heartening was, you make the argument on principle, but you also make the argument on profit. If these are for-profit businesses, Hollywood is a for-profit business, the right-thinking people in this country need to start waking up to their clout, which they have when they decide what to watch and what to purchase. And that was, I hope, a sign of what might come later down the road, that will start to get more of the attention of all these popular culture outlets that are perpetuating these ideologies. And then the last point, very quickly, was we have these waves before, and I sort of outlined some of them in the past. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the dismal 70s. And,
and how does this, talk about that comparison. We've talked about this before, and you reference it. So help me out here.
Well, you had the oil crisis in '73 because of the Yom Kippur War had a huge impact on the economy. You had the malaise. Jimmy Carter never really used that word in the speech, but it stuck. You had Watergate. You had the collapse of the Vietnam effort in '75. You had the resignation of Richard Nixon. You had stagflation, something economists thought you could never happen, stagnation and inflation at the same time. Things looked pretty dim then. I mean, the whole progressive 60s New Left types were prancing and capering in victory. They seemed to have taken control of the culture. And yet, it turned around in 1980. And so I think there's always a kind of rhythm in a democracy, a swing between sorts of extremes that manages to self-correct once one extreme gets to an intolerable level. Now, that doesn't mean it has to do that again, and that we haven't turned an unfortunate corner to a center-left or even left ideology. But that history can give us, I think, a little bit of hope.
What do you think of the generation growing up in the Obamonomics world? Will they learn the right lessons? Will they be directed toward looking at Ronald Reagan as not the villain, but as the hero? Because they're being taught by people that are teaching a failed agenda and citing history that, quite frankly, is not contextually complete.
Mm-hmm.
And that's putting it nicely, as you well know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I deal with these people as my job. Hundreds of them every year pass through my classes. Mm-hmm. And, the problem is that they've been so badly educated, as you suggest. I mean, I have a little game I play in some of my classes where I just ask basic sorts of questions. Factual questions, not deep philosophical questions. Factual questions, like what percentage of GDP does the United States spend on defense? And you'll get numbers like 40%.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you won't even get close. Even more depressing, you can ask questions, and I have a colleague who does this too.
10 times off there. 10 times off if you're talking percentage of GDP.
10 times
Pardon me.
About 4% right now.
My C plus is going up, Professor. Go ahead.
And but historical questions like when was World War I, and they'll say 14th century, and stuff like that. So they could learn these lessons, but it's going to be more difficult because they don't have a kind of historical. And I don't mean just knowledge of historical facts, but knowledge of sorts of ideas, the way ideas progress. Like that there was a thing called communism that controlled the whole country for 70-some years. It murdered some 30 million people. That was devastating. That for them, you might as well be talking about Alexander the Great. So that is what makes me a little unsure whether they can translate what's happening to them in terms of their life prospects, in terms of their opportunities, the quality of life, et cetera, and put it in the context of a failed idea and then react against that idea, or rather will be, vulnerable to that superficial, bankrupt, Occupy Wall Street income inequality rhetoric that had just put a mayor into power in New York City.
Yeah, what did you think of that? What do you think about de Blasio, a man who has vacationed in Cuba, has supported the Sandinistas, and openly did that, and still hasn't taken that back? So you're talking about somebody who supports the enemy, who goes and visits with. I mean, of course, Jay-Z did that, but he's just an entertainer and a complete, quite frankly. I won't use the word, but it is something of a donkey when it comes to the idea of going over someplace and being lauded. I mean, we see this with Sean Penn. I feel the same way about Sean Penn. But go ahead, please tell me, de Blasio, what does that signal? Because progressives are saying, hey, this is great. See, conservatives, you're losing. And look, we had Bloomberg, and now we want a little more of it.
Yeah. I think that everything points to his rule being disastrous for New York at some level, whether it's increase in crime, whether revolt against, the taxes he wants to raise, et cetera. And then, in that sense, that disaster would be good for the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, and John Podhoretz had a piece today that I think made a good point. New York City, what happens in New York City doesn't always mean a lot for the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of strange provincial place, and he pointed out since Theodore Roosevelt, there's no New York politician that has gone on to any kind of national, stature. The closest was Rudy Giuliani. That was because of 9/11 and his fantastic, leadership. He showed that, but that wasn't enough to pull him out. So, I think it's a negative example of failure. It might be, it actually might turn out useful for the rest of the country. But it just shows that these ideas are, the famous quote attributed to G.K. Chesterton: when a man stops believing in God, he doesn't believe in nothing, he believes in anything. And we've seen this anything, and progressive politics is a kind of cult belief. And no amount of reason, fact, record of failure, or anything can separate people from this belief. Only a hard slap of reality.
Okay, let's talk. Let's talk about reality, because this transcends economics, culture, and for that matter, national security. And here, I'm going to go to Dennis Rodman, calling an audible. Call me Peyton. Calling an audible, 44, cut 44. Dennis Rodman commenting while he was over in North Korea a little while back about his friend Kim Jong-un. We learned today Kim Jong-un not only killed his uncle, but he fed him to, reportedly, 140 ravenous dogs. Roll it.
North Korea has given me the opportunity to bring these players and their families over here, so people can actually see, so these players can actually see that this country is actually not as bad as people projected to be, in the media. I can control what they do with their governments. I can control what they say or how they do things here. I'm just trying to come here, and just as a sports figure, and try to hope I can open the doors for a lot of people in the country. Well, like I said, I come over to see my friend, and people always give me a little hard time by me saying that he's my friend, and I'm very proud to say he's my friend, because he hasn't done anything to put a damper or to say any negative things about my country or this and that. But like I said, if I could be that type of person to open those doors for America and people around the world, and this is going to be that one thing. And when you're going to have 12 American guys, ex-NBA ball players, going back and saying some really, really nice things, really, really cool things about this country, I've done my job.
What's Dennis Rodman's title? What would you call him? What have people like Dennis Rodman been referred to in the past, Professor?
Oh, useful idiot, but I don't even think he's that useful an idiot for North Korea. I mean, look, before this first trip to North Korea, when was it that had you ever heard Dennis Rodman's name mentioned?
Well, Celebrity Apprentice, and I've prayed for him because he's got some issues, and hopefully, he stays off alcohol. But okay, yes, I am.
I mean,
that would be yeah. It's not.
He's somebody that he needs a spotlight, and he'll do whatever he needs to do to get the spotlight. And frankly, I would prefer everybody just ignore him. I don't think he has any great meaning in terms of what's going on with our foreign policy. For example, our foreign policy towards North Korea is not going to change an iota because of what he's doing. I think if you want to look back to a moment that was more, I think, problematic for our foreign policy, was Madeleine Albright clinking glasses with
that's a great
Un's
point.
father, I think Kim Jong-il, and as a photograph and legitimizing a murderous thug. Or let's go back to the president shaking hands with Raul Castro. Those kinds of things are serious because those are people in positions of authority and power. Sean Penn, the whole Hollywood sports popular music complex. They're, in terms of the great issues of the day, I don't think they really do that much.
Okay, but we have a celebrity culture, okay, big time, and I agree with you when it comes to the substance of things. But what I would like to do, for example, when Dennis Rodman eventually comes on my show, at some point, I'm going to get him on, and we're going to do it live, and we're going to have him in studio and the whole thing. I'm really excited about it. It will happen. Many of the people we talk about will happen. You will be in studio on a weekly basis. I can't wait, Professor. I just see it. See, the American dream's not gone. It's just still there. It's still going. So tell me, Professor, if I saw him, and what I'd say is, okay, here's the carnage of what we can establish. Here's the carnage. Speak to the people that have lost 2 inches over generations and live in concentration. Confront them with the butcher's bill. Be it Iran, people who are sympathizing with Iran, be it people who are shaking hands of the brother Castro, Raul Castro, and recognize just the butcher's bill of what these people have done. I want Jay-Z, pardon me, Jay-Z to meet with the people who have been oppressed. But I don't think they have the stones, with all due respect, to do that. They don't have the fortitude to do it. Nonetheless, that's the media's job, because that would actually shine a light on the evil, and it would actually provide for a good smack in the face, similar to the Muslim Brotherhood with the president saying, "Hey, meet with the people that have been oppressed by the people that you've signed off on, Mr. President." You tell me, Professor, is that just don't even try, or is that not going to work? That's not going to get people to wake up?
Let's remember the whole sorry history of communist fellow traveling starting back in the 20s.
That's right.
By the late 20s, enough reports had come back to the West to know what was going on in the Soviet Union. And it continued to be known through the 20s, through the 30s, through the famines, through the the gulag, the torture, the assassinations, the mass murder, the cannibalism people were reduced to. All this was known. Mm-hmm. All right, this was known from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. This was known long before Khrushchev's famous speech. Right.
Yes.
Go back to 1939 and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when the Soviet Union sat down and made a mutual, aid agreement with Nazi Germany. That only stopped because Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. None of that changed the minds of the people who held the belief that the Soviet Union was the future and that communism was the way to go. Those facts were out there. They were known. The people were screaming them. They were writing books. They were begging the people in the West, "What's wrong with you? This is what's actually happening." It didn't really make that much difference. So I'm not sure that although it would be satisfying to see a confrontation such as you imagine, they have happened. These people are beyond, in my experience, they're beyond that kind of logic and that kind of empirical evidence and that kind of moral sort of intelligence. This is a belief system that has gotten control of them. It's fashionable. It has all sorts of other social sorts of rewards for people in particular jobs, such as Hollywood and popular culture. I'm just not sure that you could get through them even that way.
I gotcha. Hey, that's as Crosby, Stills, and Nash would say, that's why we need to teach our children well.
Absolutely.
And seriously, that's where truly, it's up to us to get the truth to them. If you want the truth, check out The Wages of Appeasement. Hoover Research Fellow, Dr. Bruce Thornton. Professor, it's always fun. Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Frank.
Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart. Always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. Know that God loves you. He created you, and you're worth it. AFR Talk.